Welcome to IT Pro TV. I'm your host, Don.
Coming at you live from San Francisco, California.
You're watching IT Pro TV.
Welcome to another great episode here at IT Pro TV. I'm your host, Cherokee Booth. This episode is a continuation of our change process. So we're really going to be looking at, in this episode, specifically at our regression planning. With us today, we have Mr. Ronnie Wong. Thank you for coming in today.
Well, thank you for having me here as we continue on with some CompTIA Project Plus, taking a look at the idea of the change process itself and some of the tools that we need to understand as we start working through our change. So remember that in our previous episode, if you haven't actually watched that, make sure you go back and take a look at that. The whole idea is not just to understand that change happens and we know what change needs to be done, but for a project is to ensure that we can control that change, and normally that means we submit the change to some type of review, and the way that we do that is by using forms, and then there's officially what we call a change control board that we have. Now, I didn't spend a lot of time talking about the other parts of the process, so let's kind of mention a few more terms, and then we'll get into that regression plan, because that was actually on me. I shouldn't have actually done that, okay? So let's make sure we understand the elements in terms of that change review, right? So there's you, who actually knows what the change needs to be done. You need to be able to submit that change to some type of review board that will actually decide for us whether or not that change will be accepted, whether it's going to be rejected, whether it's going to be deferred at some particular point in time. And that review board is normally made of people that have that vested interest into our project itself. Now, when we say that, right, usually what ends up happening is that it's probably the project coordinator, the scheduler, some type of technical expert that's on there, and even the project manager. It depends on what the actual change is going to be. So what you might have in a regular business is simple. You might have all the department heads actually be part of that change review board instead. That way when they see the change, they can know whether or not it affects them or not. And then they can make a recommendation if that's something that they need to take a look at. So here inside of the project, you might actually have sort of the same idea, where it's actually who's going to be the successor on that team leader, in other words, to the succeeding task, how it's going to affect the actual project scope itself. You might have all of these different people in here that's trying to figure out what's going on, and then they'll make a decision on whether to accept it or not. Now, once all that is done and now you've got the approval that the change can go on, that's when we move into that idea of talking about the regression plan. Now, I mentioned it briefly by showing you a form that we can submit for the change request itself. And so that means you have two options that can happen in the change review here, okay? So you could have it where it's exactly like it says in the form, that you're supposed to have not only what the change is and the details of that change, but that if you already have a copy of the regression plan itself, okay, then you can go ahead and attach that as well so that they have those steps there ready and available to go. Sometimes you might find out, especially in situations in which we took a look at as far as the reasons why we changed, the justification to it, whether it's a corrective plan or a preventative, but usually when it's the idea of the emergent type of situation and justification, we don't have the actual regression plan in hand yet. We just know something needs to be done, so we go ahead and we accept that fact, and then when that is submitted to the change review board very quickly, they may say, that's great, we're ready to go, but now you need to make sure that you have what we call that regression plan in place, okay? So remember that there's two options. Either it's already done, and you submit it, and everybody reviews that. And the reason why they need to have that, okay, is because something can happen in many different ways. So let's kind of give you an example of what can happen here, okay? So let's take for an example that you're part of a disaster recovery team and you're practicing for the eventual reality that this is what's going to happen, is some type of disaster for your building, okay? So in that sense, when you have everything set up the way that you need to, and now all of a sudden you realize something here, that something is not completely right, and it actually needs to be changed, well, you can go ahead in an emergency situation, submit that change, and then they can say, all right, now, when you implement this, what is your backup plan? In other words, if it doesn't work, in other words, it doesn't stem the tide of, the wall leaking or whatever it is, what is your plan to back out of that and then apply another fix, or what do you have in mind? Well, that regression plan is all about that. What are your steps to make sure that if the change doesn't work, that you can actually put it back to the same situation, and then another change can be
And
affixed
Ronnie,
to
you
it.
probably also want to go ahead and give yourself enough time to go ahead and implement that regression plan. So maybe like with IT, I normally would want to go ahead and implement a huge change during off hours, so I have that time to roll back.
Yeah, you definitely want to make sure that the timing is scheduled and everything else, but overall, though, that you have that plan in place. And even though you're the one that submits the entire regression plan for the backout, well, let's say something else happens here that you realize that here it is, I've implemented a change, and Cherokee, now I'm ready to go on my vacation, and I take off on my vacation. Let's say it's actually a flight to Hawaii, which would be lovely, but I don't think I'll ever go that way. But let's say that I am now on a flight to Hawaii. From Florida to Hawaii, it's a pretty good amount of time, and now the changes that I made have caused some, kind of cascading effects, okay? And now they come to Cherokee and go, what change did Ronnie make? And Cherokee might be able to say, oh, here's the changes that he made. All right, they're not working. How do you back out of them? And now, if I didn't leave a regression plan, in other words, the ability to back that out, Cherokee essentially now has to figure out what I did, and maybe even is there a particular order in the way that I did things that caused something to go wrong, or is there something else that's happening, okay? So in other words, she now has to essentially innovate on her own and come up extemporaneously with that idea of what to do next, to back that out.
Dun, dun, dun.
Yeah, and hopefully, everything works great. But if it doesn't, now Cherokee might be, instead of backing out of a change, Cherokee's just implementing more changes, okay? And then she's like, oh, that didn't work. And so she goes, let me try this. And now she starts implementing more changes. And now all of a sudden,
You've
tries
got so
this.
many variables that you can't even pinpoint what's going on.
Yeah, and that is a realistic problem. It snowballs in the effect. So having a regression plan in place, right, gives us that ability instead. Then the change review board now goes back and goes, that change seems to work temporarily, but it's not a long-term solution. Cherokee, here is the regression plan, implement it. And usually it's a step-by-step process on what I did and what I would do to reverse the changes that need to be done if anything happens. So it doesn't depend on me necessarily needing to come back in, because I guarantee you, once I'm on the beach on Hawaii, good luck in getting me to come back for some type of change. I'm not even going to connect to the world. No service, that's right. That's right. Ronnie Wong, out of service, no doubt. So that's why these regression plans are very important and very detailed in what they do, okay? So usually when you have something like this, even in an emergency situation, immediately after whatever Band-Aid you can put on the situation a lot of times, you do also want to make sure that you have a regression plan on hand and that's being worked on right away. Just in case you realize it is a Band-Aid, it's not a complete cure for whatever the ailment is that you have on your project as well. It's a very kind of an easy analogy for us to make, but it takes time to actually come up with those plans, because it means that you're going to remember, especially in an emergent situation, everything that you did, and then, as you tried to fix things, and then you're also going to try and say, all right, if somebody needs to back out of this as I am gone or whatever it might be, here's the steps that they need. And that's why these reviews are actually going to help you out. You might even find out for a change review board to accept everything, where they might look at everything and go, oh, you didn't have a regression plan. And they might say, we're deferring this possible change until Ronnie does what? Comes up with a regression plan and submits it for that, and then we'll actually put it on the schedule for review again. But if we choose not to, well, there's nothing that we can do except for wait. And normally in an emergency situation, we can't wait, and that's normally when we don't have that regression plan in order. But if it is something that is prescribed in terms of a corrective action or a preventative action or even a reparative action that we normally need to take, then we should have it on hand before, but not normally, it's not something we normally like to turn in after or during an emergency situation, because you're probably not even thinking about the process here. But it is something you have to think about after you implement whatever your initial plan is to get you out of that emergent situation. So regression plans, very important part of the change management process itself, okay? Now, once you have everything in place, Okay, this is when it becomes a little bit more difficult in the management of this situation. Okay, when you implement those changes, you do want to treat it almost like a checklist. Okay, if you possibly can. This is not something you want to treat like, I think I'll do this part of it, I think I won't do this part of it. Make sure you implement everything that you say that you are going to implement, because remember, if you've turned in a regression plan and you haven't done that, Cherokee comes to that point and says, it's unchecked, and he said he checked this checkbox. Okay, so should I check it or should I not check it? If I just said, I'm not even going to worry about that during that change. Well, Cherokee, what would you think? Do you think I checked it or didn't check it?
Ronnie, you're pretty efficient, so I might put some trust in you, but then again, if that falls onto my shoulders, I don't know, it's a tough decision.
Well, that's the problem, right? That's why this idea of implementing the change, if you submit it as that change, you should go every single step by that change. Even if you go, oh, I shouldn't have submitted that part, okay? Well, what do? You sit there and you back out of all those other changes that you made, and then you submit that change review again, okay? Now, that sounds a little bit legalistic, sounds very formalistic, but remember that now if you don't and you just make that ad hoc change and later on it affects someone, or like this situation that I mentioned, you make that ad hoc change but you don't have it in the regression plan and it has to be regressed by somebody else beside you to back out of it, Cherokee doesn't have a clue whether or not you did it or not. Just because I chose not to do it, or I did choose to do it, or I said, oh, I'll add in this extra little thing over here, and now Cherokee's like, was that in there already when Ronnie made the change or not?
Bottom line, get it in black and white so it removes all of the confusion.
That is absolutely the key here, is making sure that every part of it is going to be filled in, and you have to carry that out that way. It is not your time to now freestyle after you've got the okay to change, as much as you think it actually means that, okay? So in this particular part of projects especially, okay, you're going to see that this affects not only a single task that's ahead of you a lot of times, but you may see, and this is what's happened in the industry over the last 20 years, is that change management has become a field unto itself, okay? So much so that people are actually taking the entirety of change management as a process and actually applying them to entire organizational types of changes and managing the entire organization through this type of review and through this type of board. And we actually have an episode where we'll talk about the idea of managing organizational change just briefly as well. But for this point here, remember, change process is always a process. It's not about just going, I'm going to implement it, and then all the tools that we looked at, make sure you actually take account of that too, and then understanding how important a regression plan is a part of that too.
Well, thank you, Ronnie. I think that about covers it for our change processes. Stay tuned. We have more great Project Plus coming your way. I'm Cherokee Boos.
And I'm Ronnie Wong.
Signing off. Have a great one.
Thank you for watching IT Pro TV.